Cheyenne Dog Soldiers. The Cheyenne are a tribe of Algonquian linguistic stock who were closely allied with the Arapaho and Grovant, and loosely allied with the Lakota Sioux. One of the most prominent of the Plains tribes, they primarily lived and hunted on hills and prairies, along the Missouri and Red Rivers. Originally, the Cheyenne resided in the Great Lakes area, in Minnesota, and on the Missouri River. Here they lived in earth-covered log houses. In permanent settlements, farmed and made pottery. However, in the late 1600s, they began a westward migration, most likely due to competition and conflict with other native people. The Cheyenne, who've ranged from Montana to Oklahoma to Colorado, merged into one tribe in the early 19th century, under mounting pressure from the United States military and a growing tide of settlers. The Cheyenne soldiers were organized into societies, or orders, each of them fraternal, military and religious, with duties, privileges, and dress tracing their origin to some mythical creature, hero, or medicine man. They had different songs and rituals. Of these organizations, none played a role like the Cheyenne Dog Soldiers. Traditionally, Cheyenne tribal governance was organized into groups, the Council of 44 and a group of military societies. The Council of 44 consisted of elder chiefs, who managed the day-to-day governance of the Cheyenne. Military societies maintained discipline within the tribe and provided military leadership. There were a handful of military societies, including the Fox Warrior Society, the Elk Warrior Society, the Shield Warrior Society, the Bowstring Men, the Dog Warriors, as well as the Contrary Warrior Society. The Dog Soldiers were the most powerful and militant of the Cheyenne tribe's 6 military societies. The society came to prominence during the Native resistance against American expansionism in the 19th century, about 1830. All the men of the Massacre Cheyenne band joined the Dog Soldiers. The society was then comprised of about half the men in the tribe and was the most distinct, important, and aggressive of all the warrior societies of the Cheyenne. Dog Soldiers, along with other members of military societies, did law enforcement duty. They had charge of the tribal buffalo hunt and saw to it that the rules governing the hunt were observed and that all men had an equal chance to meet. They prevented any individual hunting until after the needs of the camp had been supplied. Dog Soldiers didn't just have plenty of power on the home front. As time went on, they became a true political force among the Cheyenne, especially once violent clashes between Native American and settlers became common. Members of the Dog Warrior Society represented a hard stance against the westward expansion of natives into their territories. They resisted attempts to sign treaties with the U.S. government. By 1840, the Dog Soldiers were so influential that the Cheyenne chiefs left it to them to decide whether or not peace should be made with the Kiowa, Comanche, and Apache. Following the very disastrous, drawn battle with these tribes in 1838, the peace then made by the Dog Soldiers has never been broken. The fight with the Pawnee in 1852 was a great misfortune to the Cheyenne, and in the following years, those who had lost relatives brought presents to the Dog Soldiers, urging them to avenge the dead. Accordingly, the Dog Soldiers led a campaign against the Pawnee, but finding them reinforced by a number of Potawatomi, equipped with firearms, were forced to withdraw. Gold was discovered in the Rocky Mountains in the 1850s, leading to the Pikes Peak Gold Rush and a flood of settlers to the region. The U.S. government pressured tribal leaders to sign a treaty reducing native territories to make way for the newcomers, dislocating and angering the Cheyenne, Sioux, and Arapaho who lived on the land. The Pikes Peak Gold Rush in 1858 brought the tension to a boiling point. In 1860, the Dog Soldiers refused to sign the treaty submitted by the Commissioner of Indian Affairs at Bensford on the Upper Arkansas River, saying that they would never settle on a reservation. Members of the organization were active in raiding along the Platte River. The natives soon began to successfully attack wagon trains, mining camps, and stagecoach lines, a practice that increased during the Civil War, when the number of soldiers in the area significantly decreased. This led to what became known as the Colorado War of 1863 to 1865 as the violence between the Native Americans and the miners increased territorial. Governor John Evans sent a voluntary militia commander, Colonel John Chivington, to quiet the natives in the spring of 1864. While the Civil War raged in the East, Chivington launched a campaign against the Cheyenne and their allies, his troops, attacking all natives and razing their villages. The Cheyenne, joined by neighboring Arapaho, Siu Comanche, and Kiowa in Colorado and Kansas, went on the defensive war path. After a summer of scattered small raids and clashes, a part of the Cheyenne and Arapaho were ready for peace. As a result, the native representatives met with Evans and Chivington at Camp Weld outside of Denver on September 28, 1864. Though no treaties were signed, the natives believed that, by reporting and camping near army posts, they would be declaring peace and accepting sanctuary. Cheyenne Chief Black Kettle and some 550 Cheyenne and Arapaho traveled south to set up camp on Sand Creek, under the promised protection of Fort Lyon. The Dog soldiers who remained opposed to the agreement headed north to join the Sioux. Knowing that the natives had surrendered, Chivington led his 700 troops, many of them drinking heavily, to Sand Creek and positioned them, along with their howitzers, around the native village. The trusting Black Kettle raised both an American and a white flag of peace over his teepee. However, as Chivington received orders from his superiors, he ignored the symbol of peace and surrender, raising his arm for the attack. Cannons and rifles began to pound upon the camp. As the natives scattered in panic, the soldiers began to charge, hunting down men, women, and children, shooting them unmercifully. A few warriors managed to fight back, allowing some camp members to escape across the stream. One man, Silas Sowell, a Massachusetts abolitionist, refused to follow Colonel Chivington's orders. He did not allow his cavalry company to fire into the crowd in the attack. 150 natives were killed, most of which were old men, women, and children. In the meantime, the cavalry lost only 9 or 10 men, with about 3 dozen wounded. Chief Black Kettle and his wife followed the others up the stream bed, his wife being shot several times, but somehow managing to survive. The survivors, over half of whom were wounded, took refuge in the camp of the Cheyenne Dog soldiers, who had remained opposed to the peace treaty. At the Smoky Hill River, many natives joined the Dog soldiers, deciding there could be no successful negotiations with the U.S. and waging war. Indeed, the Sand Creek Massacre is cited as a critical cause of the Little Bighorn battle, as many Cheyenne warriors devoted their lives to war against the U.S. Following the Sand Creek Massacre, the combined native force of Cheyenne Dog soldiers, Sioux, and Arapahoes formed a war party, whose objective was the raiding of the Emigrant Road. Near the Platte Bridge there, a stockade had been erected known as Camp Dodge. It is estimated that this war party numbered 3,000 men. They attacked Julesburg and Camp Rankin, killing 14 soldiers and 4 armed civilians, at little or no loss to themselves. They then embarked on a great raid. Along the valley of the South Platte River, the Cheyenne raided west of Julesburg, the northern Arapaho near Julesburg, and the Sioux east of Julesburg, destroying a dozen or more ranches and stagecoach stations along 93 miles of the river valley and accumulating a large herd of captured cattle. Near Valley Station, the Cheyenne had a minor skirmish, in which they didn't suffer any losses. During the raid, the Cheyenne encountered a group of 9 former soldiers. They killed all 9 of them and discovered 2 Cheyenne scalps in their luggage. from the Sand Creek Massacre. The natives continued north, toward the Powder River country of Wyoming, to join their relatives there. The Sioux led the way, as they were most familiar with the territory. Far to the north, in the Yellowstone River Valley of Montana, Sioux killed a colonel named Smith. Subsequently, they killed 11 men near Fort Benton on the Missouri River. Nearly daily attacks on isolated outposts, stagecoach stations, and wagon trains continued throughout June and into early July. Several additional soldiers and civilians were killed. In the following months, the natives frequently raided wagon trains and military establishments along the Oregon Trail in Wyoming. In the summer of 1865, the natives launched a large-scale offensive in the Battle of Platte Bridge. Of the 150 soldiers present, the Army suffered 29 killed and 10 seriously wounded, while there were 8 natives killed. The Dog soldiers assumed police duties during this expedition and succeeded in preventing the troops from discovering the presence of the natives. The success of the native strategy on this occasion has been credited to Ramang Nose, a Cheyenne war chief. In 1865, another attempt was made to hold a council and make a treaty with the Cheyenne, Arapaho, Kiowa, Comanche, and Apache. The commission met the tribes on the Arkansas River, and reservations were set aside in the region to the south. This treaty was accepted as binding by most of the Cheyenne, but the Dog soldiers would have nothing to do with it, though attempts were made to induce them to leave lands which they had never ceded to the government. When General Hancock attacked, the Cheyenne succeeded in getting away with their usual ease, leaving their village to be burned. During 4 months of active campaigning, General Hancock, with a force of 14 men consisting of cavalry, artillery, and infantry, succeeded in killing only 2 hostile natives, as General George Custer also failed to subdue the natives. In the summer campaign on the Republican and Smoky Hill Rivers, the Cheyenne were induced to come in for the Medicine Lodge Treaty. But as Fort Reno, Fort Phil, Kearney, and Fort Smith had been built along the Powder River Road to Montana through the last remaining hunting grounds of the tribe, the treaty came to nothing, for the natives could not sit quietly while their livelihood, the buffalo, was being destroyed. In 1868, the Battle of Beecher Island took place. It was one of the most brutal battles between the U.S. and the Plains natives in the American West. It took place on the Arikari River, then known as part of the North Fork of the Republican River near present-day Ray, Colorado. Native warriors had been attacking the settlers and travelers in western Nebraska and Kansas. For months, soldiers were sent to pursue them, but always arrived on scene after they were gone. Colonel George A. Forsyth then raised a company of 50 frontiersmen, many of whom had lost their dearest friends and relatives to the natives. On September 17, 1868, a large group of Cheyenne, Arapaho, and Sioux warriors attacked. After a few volleys of fire, the native line broke. Ramang Nose, who was a Cheyenne chief himself, fell dead from his horse, and the natives retreated. The soldiers also retreated to a sandbar in the middle of the Arikari River and concealed themselves behind the bottas of their horses. The battle now changed to a siege. Major Forsyth dispatched scouts to walk the 75 miles to Fort Wallace, Kansas for reinforcements. Many of the scouts were killed by the natives, but eventually some managed to reach the destination. The native plan was to starve the soldiers, as at the beginning of the fight, soldiers had lost their pack mules with all their provisions they had, nothing but river water and a dead horse. They laid in the sand pits for a whole week, drank river water and ate horse meat. Reinforcements for the soldiers arrived at the battle site on the morning of September 25th to the relief of the besieged soldiers. Right there, the battle was over. The natives saw the reinforcements and decided to scatter. The U.S. lost 6 soldiers with 15 being wounded. It is unclear what the native losses were, but they are estimated to be around 10 to 30. After that, the Dog soldiers participated at the Second Battle of Adobe Walls, early in the morning of June 27, 1874. A combined force of some 700 Comanche, Cheyenne, Kiowa, and Arapaho warriors, led by Comanche Chief Quanah Parker and Azate, attacked the buffalo camp. The hunters took refuge into stores and a saloon. There were only 28 buffalo hunters at the camp at the time of the attack, but their superior weapons repelled the native assault. After 4 days of continuous battle, about 100 men arrived to reinforce the post, and the natives soon retreated. While estimates vary as to the losses, as many as 30 natives were killed and many others, including Parker, were wounded. In 1876, many Dog soldiers were present at the Battle of Little Bighorn, a conflict between Sioux, Cheyenne, and Arapahoes with the U.S. Army. The fight was an overwhelming victory for the natives, who were led by several major war leaders, including Crazy Horse Chief Gall, Brave Bear American Horse, and Two Moons, and had been inspired by the visions of Sitting Bull. During the winter after Little Bighorn, Dull Knife Cheyenne were chief, and his people camped along the headwaters of the Powder River in Wyoming, where they fell victim to the Army's winter campaign for revenge in November. General Ronald Mackenzie's expeditionary force discovered the village and attacked. Dull Knife lost many of his people. The Cheyenne were forced to move. It is anticipated that the Dog soldiers were present at the capture of Dull Knife's village. It looked like the Army managed to force the Cheyenne to surrender. The government moved the Northern Cheyenne to the then Indian Territory in order to put the whole tribe on one reservation. The climate of Oklahoma did not agree with the Cheyenne from Montana. They died in large numbers. Medical supplies and rations were short, and within a year after their removal, the Northern Cheyenne were so dissatisfied that a number of them resolved to fight their way back to the north. Tangle Hair, head chief of the Dog soldiers, was one of those who fled to the north, but the real leader of the expedition was Little Wolf. Tangle Hair and a number of the Dog soldiers had split off from the main party and followed Dull Knife. They fled the reservation, moved northward into Kansas, and on September 17, 1878, attacked the cattle camps south of Fort Dodge, where they killed several settlers and drove off some of the cattle. On the afternoon of September 27, 1878, Colonel Lewis and his troops advanced on the tribe from the southwest. The Cheyenne fought the advancing soldiers. Lieutenant Colonel William H. Lewis was wounded in the thigh, and one warrior was killed. The Army retreated, and the following day Lewis died of his wounds. On September 30th, the Cheyenne appeared in Decatur County near Oberlin, Kansas. A number of men volunteered to defend the area. One company came in contact with the Cheyenne. A running fight of several miles followed, in which one Cheyenne was killed and several others were wounded. Altogether, 17 volunteers were killed. After a couple of fights with the soldiers and volunteers, the Cheyenne decided to divide at Running Water. Dull Knife and his band went toward Red Cloud Agency. He was near Fort Robinson when he surrendered. They were imprisoned in Fort Robinson, and on their refusing to return to the South, were starved for 8 days. Then they broke out from the prison and attempted to make their escape over the moonlit snow. A fight occurred, and more than a third of the natives, men, women, and children, were killed, among them Tangle Hair, chief of the Dog soldiers. After complicated negotiations, Dull Knife and the remaining of his people were moved to the Pine Ridge Agency in South Dakota later. He lived on a reservation assigned to the surviving Cheyenne in the Rosebud Valley. He died in 1883. On the other hand, Little Wolf remained all winter in the sand hills where there was plenty of game and no settlers. Later he went to Montana and then to Pine Ridge, where he and his people remained in peace until they were removed to Lame Deer, Montana, and there spent the remainder of his days. The result of the Northern Cheyenne escape is that a part of them successfully reached their destination and remained there about a year, but were forced to surrender. The Northern Cheyenne Indian Reservation was established in southeastern Montana near the Black Hills, and they were never forced to return to the South. In their quest to subdue the Cheyenne, the United States government spent $1 million and lost 24 lives for every Cheyenne killed.